Hey government students, let's get started taking a look at the roles and the functions of the President of the United States. The presidency of the United States is sometimes the subject of great ridicule, of great fun, but also it's one of great power. Before we start out, a little disclaimer. Hey folks, let's take a look at the roles of the President. As I mentioned before, a little disclaimer as we do this. These are not constitutionally written down. They're not found in Article 2 of the Constitution, so there is no legal formal basis for this, although it has been interpreted that the President does have these powers. So follow along and we'll explore the roles of the President as follows. Before we get into the roles of the President, though, I do want to mention that we need to look at the constitutional qualifications. According to the Constitution, you must be at least 35 years old, must have lived in the United States for 14 years, and of course be a natural-born citizen. These are different than the requirements for the U.S. Senate and U.S. House. However, consider this. One of the things that I really want to look at in class is what are the informal qualifications. What are those things that you must have on your resume or pieces about you as a person that would qualify you for president, or those things that would almost disqualify you automatically. So think about those as we come together in class to talk about those. There are benefits to being president. There is a $400,000 salary that is tax-free. You get a $50,000 a year expense account for your the expenses incurred. There are travel expenses associated with being president, so they get $100,000 a year. Of course, they get a place to live, the White House. They get Secret Service protection, which is always handy. They get a country estate called Camp David out away from the White House. They can use Air Force One as their personal airplane, and more importantly, they get a staff of about 400 to 500 people to help them do their jobs. Now, the jobs of the president, there are 8 of them. We'll go through each one here in a second. But the jobs are head of state, chief executive, chief administrator, chief diplomat, commander-in-chief, the chief legislator, the chief of the party, and the chief citizen. Now, again, some of these are constitutionally mandated. Certainly not all of them. So don't nail me to the Constitution if you're a literalist or a contextualist or whatever. But know that these are accepted roles when we look at the job of the presidency. Now, the first one is the head of state. This is a very formal position, has no real government power other than to be the person that welcomes other heads of state to the United States. So when Queen Elizabeth came in 1983, Ronald Reagan hosts a state dinner for her, but also then going over to represent the United States, as Kennedy did at the Berlin Wall during the Cold War, as Nikita Khrushchev was blocking out East from West Berlin. A formal power that is listed in Article 2 is that the president is the chief executive. The job there is to carry out and enforce the laws that are passed by Congress. So as a basic piece of understanding of government, the legislature makes the laws, and the executive branch is in charge of enforcing the laws, make sure that they're being followed. The chief administrator is the one who runs the agencies of the national government to make sure that they're functioning like a well-oiled machine. This is why in 1963, after Kennedy's assassination, almost immediately, as soon as possible, as soon as they could get a federal judge in front of the vice president, Lyndon Johnson took the oath of office, as you can see here next to the recently widowed Jacqueline Kennedy. We needed a president, we needed an administrator to run things. That's one of their chief jobs. Just the same as after 9/11, when we have President Bush visit the workers at Ground Zero to really make sure that they feel the support, the government is behind them, and that he's going to clear the way to make sure whatever needs to get done gets done. That's a very powerful position, the chief administrator, that role of the president. We also look at the role of the chief diplomat. One of the things that the president does that's tremendously important is to negotiate treaties and settlements with other countries. In the case of 1978, you have President Carter sitting down with the leaders of Egypt and Israel, Menachem Begin of Israel and Anwar Sadat of Egypt, to try and broker a peace, something that every president has tried to do since the Middle East peace crisis began. You also have the president sitting down with enemies, if you will, or former enemies, to create a path forward, as we have done, as you see George H.W. Bush sitting down with Mikhail Gorbachev, and looking at a way forward for the world and the United States after the Cold War had ended. Of course, the one that we know the most about is the role of the Commander-in-Chief. Their job is obviously to run the military actions, conduct war. Notice they don't have the power to declare war, but they do have the power to conduct war as one of their chief responsibilities. Now, this can be quite divisive, as was the case for Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson, by many scholars, is credited or dubiously credited with escalating the Vietnam War. So a wartime president can be seen as a difficult position, or it can be seen as a powerful position, as you see President Bush in what I like to call the G.I. Joe moment, landing on the USS Lincoln and eventually giving a speech later saying that the mission was accomplished. Now note the timeline and the date. He gives the mission accomplished speech in May of 2003, and it wasn't until 2013 that we actually had all of our forces removed from Iraq. So there's some debate there. One of the ones that is definitely difficult for literalists of the Constitution to swallow is the president as chief legislator. Now, it's not a member of Congress. We've talked about how members of Congress introduce legislation, but more and more in the modern presidency, the president is looked to create the legislation and then have his allies introduce it in Congress. Much of the New Deal was obviously from FDR. Some of the major things that we still have today, the Social Security Act, unemployment insurance, comes out of the New Deal, which was an idea of the president that then the Congress implemented. The president will give a speech to Congress, the State of the Union, every year in January to indicate to the Congress this is what he would like to see done, and that this would be the president's way forward. And so, in a sense, introduces the ideas of legislation in that speech moving forward. And really the last part of the role of the president is an informal role, but important as the chief of the party. So as political parties are the powerhouses of the American election cycle, the president can be a major fundraiser. The president can be a major endorsement. If you get the president's endorsement for a seat that you're running for, then that's a really positive influence if, of course, that president has a positive approval rating. If the president doesn't have a positive approval rating, well, they might be the chief of the party, but their coattails might not be very long. They might not want to be carted around for other endorsements of other candidates. The last one that we really need to look at is chief citizen. Most people do look to the president as a moral leader of our country. One of the reasons that President Lincoln was elected in 1860 and remained a powerful force was because he set a moral purpose for the war of ending slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation. We look to our President Lincoln and other presidents as moral leaders, upstanding citizens that we should all aspire to be, with the exception, of course, of those presidents that make some choices of immoral nature or violations of law. Nixon is someone that comes to mind. We didn't see Nixon as a moral leader very much, nor do we see President Bill Clinton as a moral leader. Of course, his perjury testimony in the Whitewater investigations and what then came of those investigations was the affair with Monica Lewinsky, where he famously said, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." But he lied and admitted to lying later on, but that caused a lot of problems and perspectives for a lot of Americans. So, all in all, that's a look at the roles of the president, and it's important